Hi, everyone, and welcome to one of our first episodes as we have renamed our podcast, and it is now Rock Your Shine After You Have Been Cracked Wide Open. Today, this conversation is very special to me because I have not done an interview yet with somebody who has lost a best friend. We often have losses of spouses or siblings, children. We've had conversations about divorce, addiction. And so I am deeply honored for us to be able to have this space and time to talk about what it means to lose a best friend and how that can really change and transform our life. With me today, I have Robbie Laughlin, who is a multi-disciplinary textile artist, and he teaches in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. He designs patterns and teaches classes and does photography for knitting, crochet, yarn dyeing, weaving, mending, and hand spinning yarn. And I know he does volunteer work. Some of you may have heard our episode on the Loose Ends Project, and that is how Robbie and I found each other. So Robbie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Susan. It's an honor to be here and talk with you about this.
Yeah, I know I'm always smiling on my Grief and Loss podcast, but it's always because of, I think, the beauty and grace that unfold in these kind of conversations. And I hope that I'm always hoping that whoever is listening is able to take some seedling of hope with them through these conversations. So, Robbie, I know that you have lost your very best friend, Sandra. It was a year ago in March. And I just want to honor that year anniversary can be particularly challenging and difficult for people. So I want to honor that. And I would like you to start with how you met your best friend.
Sure. So, my background was actually in teaching technology. And what I did was I was a corporate trainer and a staff trainer in a very large tech company. And I came to a point in my life where I had done so many digital things that I wanted something tactile. And I had learned to knit originally when I was probably 5 or 6 from my grandmother. And I decided I was going to pick that back up. And naturally, the part of me that gets obsessed with something and hyper focused on it decided that I was going to start teaching knitting classes as a way to earn some extra money and pass on this excitement that I had. And after doing that for a couple of months, I actually quit my job in technology to have a full-time career in the fiber arts industry. I worked in a yarn store and I was teaching classes there. And that's actually how I met Sandra. She came into that shop looking to relearn how to knit after not having done it for probably 40 years. So she was a little older than me. She was 69 when she passed away, and I'm in my early 40s. And she came in, I'll never forget, she came in to learn how to knit. And she was one of those people who just brought joy into any room that she set foot in. You know, she was the person who everybody would drop what they were doing because they wanted to hear what she had to say. So she had that energy about her that was just infectious and lovable. And we just kind of instantly clicked, and we learned that we had so many things in common, and we just became really wonderful friends. And it was over that initial moment of learning to knit that we met each other and developed that connection.
I just have to do a little side story here because you said that you learned to knit through your grandmother. And I also tried to knit through my grandmother, and she got so frustrated with me. She like playfully threw the needles at me, and that was the end of my knitting career. So I just thought that was sweet. So you and Sandra, and so she took knitting classes from you. And so tell us, so this unlikely is the word that comes to mind, friendship unfolded and grew over time through knitting. And so
Yeah.
tell us about that friendship.
Well, it turned out that we both were also the kind of people that wanted to just go for long walks and be outside and doing things. And so she was that friend that I would just call on a Friday night and we'd go for a 4-hour walk, across the entire city, like walking along the lake shore and observing the world around us. And over time, we got ourselves into so much mischief that way, exploring things and meeting new people and going to different places that had fiber arts as part of them, traveling around together and doing these kinds of things. And we just always had, such a good time, so many laughs. And she's the kind of person that could draw in a complete and utter stranger. So through her, I got to meet so many wonderful people because she just had that energy that strangers were drawn to.
That light. I know
Yeah,
exactly
that
what you're
inner
talking
light.
about.
Yeah.
I don't know why this question is coming to me. What did she do in her professional life?
She worked for the government before she
She
retired.
retired, yeah.
She retired early because she had cancer.
Okay, we'll get to that in 2 minutes. I want to ask a question, though, about this friendship that unfolded because it's starting with knitting lessons and then it bloomed into this friendship. What did the two of you talk about? I mean, you're in your 40s, she was in her late 60s. I know you said you had fun together and you could walk for hours. What are the types of things that you guys would talk about? What did you have in common?
I mean, it was a lot, actually. So I lost my mother when I was 25 to cancer. So I already knew when I met Sandra, she had cancer. So we talked a lot about that. We talked a lot about illness and, what it does to you. When I met her, her mother was also in a nursing home close by. And so we had a lot of shared and similar experiences. The funny thing about that is a lot of them I went through first when I was younger, and now she was going through them when she was older. And being able to have those conversations with somebody and share those memories and have a moment where you have that understanding and that connection over what's going on in your life. It was a time in my life too where big changes were happening. Quitting a secure job to do something off the seat of your pants is scary. And she was really good at encouraging me to keep pursuing it and to do better. She got a certain excitement every time I got some new opportunity to try something else. She was my biggest supporter in that way.
Your angel on earth, right? When I think about the light beings that, the universe has a way of putting that person in our path. Because as I told you before we started recording, I just left my big job of, been in mental health for 30 years and it's terrifying. And yet you get to this point, I think some of us where the urge is so strong and the calling is so loud, it's almost like you don't have a choice, but you've got these people that can sort of like are a net for you, right? Where you get so scared and you're like, oh my God, I got to go get a job. And then they're there to just encourage you and
talk you off that ledge.
and talk you off that ledge. Let me ask a question though. I feel like this is important for myself and listeners to understand. Sandra had cancer. Was she in remission? Was she actively terminal? Was she getting chemo? Like, was she getting treatment? What was going on for her at the time?
So as long as I knew her, she was always on active treatment, always on chemo or radiation or some such thing. And the thing that I drew most from Sandra was that you can't let the small stuff in life get you down. You cannot let something get in your way of accomplishing and doing the things that you want to do. She taught me that the first day I met her. Here's this woman who has breast cancer and is battling it, and it's a constant force in her life. Yet she's living life to the absolute fullest, taking classes, exploring anything she could get her hands on, being adventurous and approaching everything with that sense of wonder.
This is such a timely conversation. I'm in the depths of reading Awakening the Buddha Within, and have always listened to these incredible spiritual gurus. And I was listening to one the other day, and we're all going to die, and yet we act like, I think, that it's not really going to happen to us. But what was so beautiful about this conversation was knowing our imminent death should be driving the way we live every day, every single day. And, we always hear the cliches, live today like it's your last. What does that mean? That doesn't mean that you need to get on a plane and go start an orphanage over in Africa, right? It can be take a walk and really experience the beauty that is around us all the time, and to get out of this constant chatter and worry and this egoic mind of ours. Enjoy the steps that we are taking. If you're walking through a park. And I love that you're talking about this, because here is this light angel in your life that is a constant reminder that the end is imminent, at least before we make that transition. Right? Mm-hmm. This is our time to experience the sensual delights in this world through sound and smell and touch. And I know that we can get very caught up in this belief of you got to have a job and you got to go every day. And even if you don't like it, you still have to muddle through. And that is no way to live. So it's like I said, it's just so timely. And so there she was saying, you have no choice. Go follow that heart and that calling.
Yeah. And in fact, encouraging it and showing me how to slow down and appreciate it for what it was.
Yeah. It's so tender. This friendship feels so tender because on the one side, you're making this incredible friendship with this human being. God, I always start to get emotional at some part during these calls. And you also know that the end is pretty imminent for her, it sounds like. I mean,
at first I didn't, but the end is imminent for all of us.
Right.
And I understood that, befriending somebody who has cancer means they're probably going to go sooner. Befriending somebody who's older than you probably means they're going to go sooner too. But
did that help you cherish the time that you had together even more?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was a combination of knowing that she wouldn't always be there, but also the way that she reminded me to enjoy everything. She was that person where if you went for a walk, you'd stop every 5 minutes to look at something.
Yeah.
Or hear something, or smell something, or speak to a stranger. That's why those walks took 4 hours. And that's a lesson that sticks with you. And it's a lesson that you can carry forward into everything in your life.
Tell us what that looks like. What have you, since her death, what have you taken with you? How has your life changed as a result of your friendship and influence of Sandra?
Yeah, I think we'd have to rewind a little bit on that, actually, because the way she passed.
Please tell us everything.
So it was November of 2021. She told me that she knew the end was coming sooner than expected. And in fact, she'd gotten a diagnosis to tell her that she probably had about 6 months left to live. And one of the things that we had discussed a lot when that happened was how she wanted things to play out when it got bad. And she was one of those people who wanted to go at home and wanted to be surrounded by the people that she loved. And she wanted to have some semblance of control and dignity over the process. So the decision that she made was to enlist medical assistance in dying. Here in Canada, that's referred to as MAID, M-A-I-D. And that's quite a process, actually. It's quite drawn out.
Can you explain to us what that is? Is that an acronym for something?
Yeah, MAID. It's medical assistance in dying. So basically, when you have a terminal illness, you can enlist this service, and it's much like, you know, it's the same thing we do for our pets that we love.
We have it here too, death by dignity, I think it is called. I'd have to look it up, but it's same thing.
Yeah.
You have to meet certain criteria in order to be able to, yeah.
To enlist this service. And she certainly met that criteria. So we set out on the process. Her brother and I both assisted with that. And what that process looks like is it's a series of interviews as you approach that final time in your life. It's check-ins to sort of make sure that this is what you want, that you're not being coerced into it, that this is a decision that you're making of sound mind. And as this process played out and her physical health got worse and she became housebound and later bedbound, her brother and I supported her through that. And we got in touch with this doctor who performs these types of procedures and had that final interview, knowing that things were taking a really drastic turn for the worse. She spent the last few weeks of her life kind of having people come to visit that she hadn't seen in a long time, which was a real treasure. It was, I'd often be there kind of cleaning or puttering around just to be there to make sure that she was okay and things were going well and nobody was stressing her out. And the day before she passed, she pulled me aside and said, "I want you to come over tomorrow so that we can call the doctor." And I went home that night and I never got to go back. So
you're telling did she pass in her sleep?
She was actually rushed to the hospital in very dire condition. Things just took a real big nosedive that night. And it was still, hospitals were still being very limiting on who was allowed in. So her brother went to sit with her while she passed. And our original plan was to have her pass at home with all of us around her. And the day that we were all set to do that, it didn't happen.
And this was still during COVID.
Yeah.
So were people not allowed in the hospital to be with her?
She was allowed one person. And so obviously her brother took that place. And yeah, that was it.
And I'm sorry that you were not able to be there with her.
Yeah, it's a different, I've lost other people in my life before. I've never had to plan that loss. And I've never had to plan to support somebody through that situation. And there's so much buildup that goes into that. And then it just disappeared.
How did you deal with the aftermath of this?
So it's a very interesting situation. As you've heard through Jen and Macy talking about the Loose Ends Project, when a crafter dies, there's that bag. It wasn't a bag, it was several bags in this case, because she had started things for everybody in her life, wanting to leave something behind for everybody. And nobody else knew what to do with it. So I took it. And I used that as a way to process how I was feeling and that grief I was experiencing. I took those half-finished projects one by one and picked them up and finished them. And it brought about a feeling of closeness that I needed to get through that moment. It made me feel like that loss, that connection wasn't so sudden and much more gradual, which is what it was originally supposed to be.
So can I ask you, I'm really emotional during this call today too. I wonder if she's with us. Did she talk about the things that were in her bag? Was it a request? So you knew?
I knew, and she was a note taker. So there was actually a notebook explaining what everything was and who it was for and what those intentions were. She was a very organized person that way. And so after she passed, I immediately picked those things up and set to work and got them all finished. And, you know, if you're not a handcrafter, you may not know that there's a certain zen about that. Doing something mindful and repetitive gives you space to think. You know, when you're working on something simple with your hands, you are doing the same thing over and over and over again. It's almost like a meditation. So every time I sat down to work on these projects of hers, it was a meditation. It was thinking about her and processing all that had happened. Because it was 6 months from the time that she said to me, I'm dying, to her dying. And it was fast. You know, it went from being the person who could walk with me for 4 hours to the person who couldn't walk to the bathroom in 6 months.
So
A
quick.
lot to process. And so using that time where I was actively engaged with these items of hers that needed to be finished, it allowed me to slow down and carve out that time for myself to think and process and to have those feelings, to sort of let them just be what they are. And in June, so she passed away March 15th, and in the middle of June, we had a memorial service for her. There was no funeral. And at that memorial service, I actually got to meet all of these people and hand them the things that she had started for them.
I can only imagine how sacred that was for you and for the receiver.
Yeah, there were a lot of tears that day. You know, I met somebody who's been a close friend of hers since high school that I'd never met before.
So they didn't know these people that you were finishing these what were they? Sweaters, hats, mittens, scarves, everything you can imagine, right?
Under the sun. And these people didn't know that I was doing it.
And did you bring them all in one place, or did you?
I brought them all to that memorial service in a tote bag, a giant tote bag full of knitted things. And it was an experience unlike any other because, you know, for me, for the past 10 years, knitting has been a moneymaker. It's been a career. It's been a thing I have to do. And these projects were something very different for me. They were about feeling and slowing down and processing and putting love back out into the world for other people.
And infusing the love that you two shared into these incredible gifts of legacy.
It's tangible items that have so much feeling bundled up in them.
That is just such a beautiful story. And so the crazy part about this is that the Loose Ends project you learned about after this, correct?
Yes, I had done all of these things. Loose Ends started up in the fall after this all took place. So when I saw Loose Ends, I want to say it was close to Christmas time that I actually discovered them. And I saw it, and immediately I just went and filled out that form to sign up to become a finisher because I understood so inherently the impact that this could have not only for the receiver of the finished item, but for me, to be able to slow down and have these items that are mindful meditation. That's what the process is for me. It gives a lot back to me too. It was surprising for me that I wasn't expecting it.
That's amazing. I mean, I think that when I asked you that question about, the idea of being cracked wide open and discovering who we really are at our core, which is love, and, asking you how this friendship has changed your life, sounds to me like this. It sounds to me that the honoring of your friendship and the meditation that you did through completing these projects, how would you say that experience has changed your perspective on life?
Oh, in quite a few ways, actually. I would say, first and foremost, it's really taught me to slow down and focus on the moment that I'm in. And it's also taught me, to think about life isn't just about you. Life is about everybody around you. And there are so many things that we can do that are small, that have such a big impact. Knitting a stitch is something I can do with my eyes closed, and it's something that my hands can just automatically do. And it's not a big deal for me, but it can be a really big deal for somebody else, especially when what you're giving them is a piece of a loved one. And really getting to experience what that looks like for so many people in such a short span of time through my friend has helped me realize that actually this is a gift that I can give to so many other people. There are so many other people in this world who experience loss and who are hurting and who are grieving. And to be able to give them that moment where a little piece of their loved one comes back in a tangible form, it's an extremely powerful feeling. It's an ultimate act of giving and love.
Yeah, it's in receiving, like you said, what we receive when we open our heart around compassion, true compassion. It expands our own energy field of love and light into the world in a way that you can't see, but you can feel.
Yeah.
And, I wrote my whole thesis on writing through grief, loss, and trauma. And of course, wrote my book after my brother died. And the only thing I could think of was you knit your way through your grief and loss.
I did. Yeah.
And that repetitive motion of meditation and love. And I'm curious, during your, this time when you were completing work for her and for others, when you're in this mindful meditation, what other epiphanies or pieces of you have you awakened to? I know you said about being more mindful, and anything else that has come about as a result of this.
Yeah. When you make the kind of decisions that you or I have to leave a big job and do something else, that self-doubt never goes away. I've been doing it for about 10 years, and I still experience that self-doubt sometimes. And there's something about doing this work for others and, witnessing their reaction and how it makes them feel that reminds you that you've made the right decision. And so in enlisting myself to keep doing this, it's a constant reminder that I've not made a mistake. Because a lot of people, when I made that decision, were quick to tell me what a mistake it was and how much I was going to regret it, and how you can't use creativity as a means to earn a living, and you can't support yourself that way. That's the messaging that I got.
Well, that's very universal. That's where we come up with, the poor starving artist, right? I mean,
Yes.
those of us who are writers, it's the same thing. It's like we do all the things that we love the most that feed us so intensely on the side, and when you truly take that leap of faith, your life might have to look a little bit different, at first while you try to get yourself established. But then also, you may never make the amount of money that you made at a big corporate job. And you may not need to, right? Living more simply. I mean, it really is so personal, these choices that we make, but we are always going to have the voices of fear because it's projection, it's other people's fear, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to make it. You're going to starve. You're going to, whatever, like do it on the side. If you need to knit on the side, etc. And so I'm interested though with your doubts that you still have after a decade. And of course, this is purely personal because of what I'm doing right now. What are the doubts? When you start to hear the voice of doubt, what is that about, do you suppose?
I think a lot of it just comes from insecurity.
Yeah.
We're taught from a young age that we need to doubt ourselves. We're taught as children that you need to behave a certain way and you need to do a certain thing. And, you're told to keep your voice down. You're told not to do that in public. We get all these messages as children, and I don't think it ever truly goes away. I think we just find a different spot to place it.
Yeah, I think that that's really beautifully put because the image that I have with this woman, Sandra, is that this is going to sound so cliche, but the image that's coming to mind is opening up like a lotus flower, where when you can be, when we meet a kindred spirit and can just take off all of these masks that we really accumulate over the years of our life for lots of different reasons, that when we can really show up maskless, there's a freedom in that until you experience it, you don't even know that exists when you can get down to the core of who you actually are. And it sounds like that's what Sandra also was for you. Is that right?
That's very correct. Yeah, very, very much so. That's the big thing that I take away from that friendship and will keep with me for the rest of my life. It's two things. It's slowing down and showing yourself some love, and it's letting yourself just be you, unabashedly just be you.
So I asked you before we started this conversation if you had a relationship with Sandra's family. And you said, indeed, you did.
Yeah.
And you continue those relationships, just more gifts that this woman has given to you. What has it been like for you to continue a relationship with Sandra's family? What is that giving to you?
Well, going through this process it's a group thing.
Yeah, that's well put.
It's very much a group activity, especially when you get down to the logistics of, helping someone pass at home and not in a hospital or a long-term care facility. It's a group activity. Everybody pitches in and you have to, communicate with each other and plan and try to make sure somebody's always around. And
Exactly, rotating the shifts, right? Of making
yeah,
sure that yeah, all of
like
it.
go get the groceries and
Yeah,
who's going to do the laundry and all those various things. So we all just sort of became friends through that process, because we had this commonality bringing us all together. There was a neighbor across the hall too named Maria who did an awful lot for her, and Maria's part of that. We'll get together, all of us, and go out for dinner and catch up and find out what's going on in each other's lives and celebrate that a little bit. And it just, I think it's just because we became close going through this experience together. And so now anytime we see each other, it's like it didn't stop, you know.
yeah. Did Sandra have children? I know you mentioned her brother, but Sandra didn't have any children.
Children, no.
No children. And And it's been a year. Where are you now with this process?
I'm at a place where it's gotten a lot easier. If I had spoken to you last summer, it was still a really difficult time for me. I couldn't go certain places that we always went together. Certain things would just trigger me to become an absolute mess because I hadn't processed my way through those feelings yet. Now I'm at a place where I can talk about or do these things and go to these places, and I feel a fond memory. And I've opened myself up to the point where I can celebrate it rather than mourning it.
What's your beliefs about the afterlife? Do you believe in an afterlife? Do you believe in a soul? Like, what's your sort of spiritual framework, I guess?
Had you asked me that 2 years ago, I would have said no afterlife, no soul, no nothing. But this experience has definitely changed that for me.
How come? In what way?
I feel like sometimes I'm receiving messages from her. There are things that happen in my life. Even the day she passed, I went for a walk in the park that we always went to. It's Toronto's largest park. It's steps from where I live. And we used to go there all the time. It's kind of our version of Central Park almost. And I set one foot into that park the day after she passed, and out of nowhere, it was a rainstorm. It was like the universe was crying.
Wow. That's just the image of that is super powerful.
Yeah.
What other messages do you feel like you've gotten from her?
Putting loose ends in my path, I'm sure, was somehow connected to her. This is the type of thing where, she had breast cancer, and she used to, I don't know if you've ever heard of a knitted knocker.
No, I've not. What is a
It's
knitted
a
knocker?
hand knit breast prosthetic. So women have mastectomies and
Right.
various treatments that cause them to lose breasts. And traditional prosthetics can be very uncomfortable. They're hard, they can be itchy. There's a lot of people out there who hand knit them using a soft cotton yarn. And that's what Sandra used to do. She'd go to the hospital for her chemo and sit there and knit these knockers. She was the kind of person who would just be constantly doing something for someone else. And I think if she were here with me, she'd be an active loose ends participant right now, too.
She'd be running it. She would say, Maisie and Jen, push over.
Yeah, she would be doing whatever she could to take part in that. That's just who she was. And so
she was like this. Okay, I have to pause on the power of what you are saying right now.
Yeah, she'd be in the hospital getting her chemo
and knitting
a prosthetic boob for somebody else.
Just that they're called knockers, there is something so playful and hilarious about that, and so beautiful. So I have this image of her that everybody at chemo loved and knew her too, right? The nurses and the patients, like everybody loved Sandra.
Yeah, it was unequivocal.
Are you knitting these knockers? I love it so much.
I do sometimes. Yeah, I do. Here in Canada, there's a very active community of people knitting them. They have a social media for it, and there's one in the US too. There's organizations for this all over the world, actually.
Wow.
It's another thing that happens that's, knitting and caring for others. There are so many of those things in the world.
Well, and I think that is very true for craft people of what I mean, I used to do a lot of stained glass, and I think it's just one of those things different people are drawn to different vocations and things for a reason, right? I mean, that's why we've got a bunch of cliches out there for different things that people do. And it seems like the community, and I heard this through Maisie and Jen, I don't know if you listened to their interview, but 7,000 volunteers all over the world in 6 months. I have never heard of such a thing in my whole life, which tells you something about people who do this kind of craftsmanship. I mean, there's something about it that, have you ever, I mean, it's just 7,000 volunteers in a 6-month period of time is insane. I just, when she told me that, she's like, we don't even have enough projects for these people to do, right? Because, and so that told me, I learned a lot through listening to their story, that this is just part of the culture that you guys are a part of, is giving back through your craft.
That's the reason I became a teacher, being able to pass that tradition and that message of hope and love along in a playful way.
You didn't get that in technology?
No, I didn't.
I'm just trying to do little things with my website, and I want to throw a rock through my computer half the time. I think technology actually like increases people's rage and their blood pressure. No, I mean, I'm half joking because I do think that partly is true. We've been on for almost an hour, and I want to wrap us up with a couple of questions. I want to thank you for sharing her light with us, though, because I, honest to God, could have been able to feel it through our entire conversation. I'm usually not this emotional through an entire interview. My question is, and I feel like you've answered it so beautifully throughout our talk, but I often say that, self-love can look very different after a loss. It changes us in some way, in some profound ways, if we allow it to. What does self-love mean to you now?
Yeah, it's very different now than it was a year ago for me. For me, self-love is now slowing down and living in the moment, knowing that this could be that last moment. Who knows? So it looks like slowing down, appreciating everything that's around you, and really engaging with that. And it looks like doing what you want to do, not what you have to do.
Okay, finish the sentence for me. Hope is
being able to take something and pass it on in a big way to other people, whether that's knowledge or a story or a set of stitches. Hope is taking something and putting it back out into the universe so that good things can happen.
Thank you for that. Gonna kill me here, Robbie. Okay, now, where can people find you?
Yeah, I have my own website where people can look up, what kind of classes I'm teaching and things that I've designed. That's robbielaughlin.ca. I'm also on Instagram. I'm a lot more active over there, and it's Robbie KL, ROBBIEKL.
And we'll have those links. We'll have those links in the show notes. And I apologize. I mispronounced your last name when I introduced you. So, and I just realized that I think I pronounced it as Laughlin. So thank you for correcting me. It's probably my eyesight when I was reading it. I cannot thank you enough for this conversation. I felt like the entire conversation was infused by her love and light, and it certainly shines through you.
I'd love to share one last thing with you.
Please, anything. Thank you. My last question always is there something I haven't asked?
Yeah, so I've been volunteering with Loose Ends since just before her 1-year passing mark. That was when they contacted me for my first finish. I've just completed my second finish. It was a beautiful sweater started by a woman for her husband. And it couldn't have been more serendipitously timed that I took that to the post office last night before having this conversation with you. It's now on its way back to them. And I had a real moment last night where it's tradition to sort of stop and take a picture and email it and let everyone know, it's on its way back. Here's the tracking number. And I stopped during that moment and I realized that, as you said, what is hope? This is hope. This is hope for somebody else that's going back out into the universe. And it's having this experience now, doing it for other people who I've never met before, is so powerful. The amount of love and appreciation that goes both ways in this experience is just intangible. You really, until you experience it firsthand, you really can't understand that you've made a connection with somebody that's going to last forever.
I have no idea what to say to you. I am so honored to have this conversation with you today. And I want to say too that we'll also, for those of you who may be interested in the Loose Ends Project, we will also have a link in the show notes to that episode. Robbie, thank you for sharing your love and your light and your shine with the world and with us. I hope that our listeners, I don't think there's any way anyone can listen to this and not take something from it, but I want to thank my listeners for tuning in, and I love you guys, and go rock your shine, and we'll see you here next week. Bye for now.